Okay, good evening, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. I know most of us in Canada are celebrating. This is our Thanksgiving weekend, and so I want to take this opportunity to wish everybody very nice Thanksgiving holidays. And if you're having dinner with your families or you're hanging out with your families, I wish you the best. Enjoy the rest of the day. Tomorrow is a holiday for us as well. Time to just relax, sit back, and just get a lot of rest. Many parents, dads, children themselves, everybody's been running around up and down, trying to get things together. But I mean, we are very fortunate to have tomorrow as a holiday. So but then again, I'm very grateful that you've joined us tonight on the show. I have with me Bill Edgett. He's always pretty much with me. And I also have Natalie Forshak, who's here tonight to share her story on parental alienation. This, personal experience, something that she's been through, and she want to be able to share that. I think her story is very powerful, and it's going to help a lot of parents that are going through, the same situation, as well as children that are being alienated. Unfortunately, there are hundreds and thousands of parents that are going through the same thing. Some parents do not know where to turn to. Unfortunately, many of us that are going through this, we are not able to share our stories. For some reason, for fear, but it takes a lot of boldness. It takes a lot of boldness. It takes a lot of courage. To be able to come to that place in life. To finally say that, no, I'm gonna share my story. I'm gonna speak out. And I'm so thankful that to God that Natalie is at that point right now where she's emboldened. She's been able to get to that place of her life where she wants to share this story so other people can learn something from it, and also maybe through her story something that will turn around for somebody. I'm gonna post a link to the comment section. If anybody, for those of you that are watching us tonight, please feel free to share the link. It's the YouTube link. We are broadcasting on Twitter, on three or four different Facebook channels, and then Instagram as well. So please feel free to share the link to with your friends and families. And if you are on the YouTube channel, by all means, you can subscribe to the channel, so we'll be able to notify you anytime we're about to go live with any of our shows. We have from now till end of November. We are fully booked with different people coming up to share their stories. A lot of people are interested in sharing their stories, and I believe this is the power that we have, being able to share our stories. And so, Natalie, I truly appreciate your time tonight. Thanks for coming on.
No, you're
Uh,
welcome.
I really thank God for for what you are doing, sharing your stories. I think it's a very powerful thing that you are doing. And Bill, thank you so much, for having you tonight as well.
Thank you
Um,
again for having me on.
and just before we get started, Bill is gonna start broadcasting on Thursday. I'm gonna post the link. There's gonna be posters out. Basically, his podcast is going to be a platform where people that are going through parental alienation can come up and share their story. Believe me, there's nothing to be afraid of. I believe that the more we talk about these things, the more we create awareness. But this in itself is a therapy for many people. It's just a point of healing. The more you're able to talk, the more you're able to speak out, the better off you are. It heals you. You know that you're not alone. People that are hearing you, and eventually you feel it within your inner being that something is being healed. And so, Bill, before I pass over to Natalie, anything that you want to share, anything that you want to add?
So there's just a tiny bit of feedback there, so I didn't hear the last little bit.
Okay, there's a feedback. Is it better?
It could be blame the new girl. Okay. Are you getting feedback from me?
I just hear a double
Yeah, I am
feedback
too.
here.
All right, well, I'm going to turn this down. I'm not going to be able to hear you. Signal me to stop.
Okay, I think I know what's happening. Your um, speaker is feeding into the microphone. So unless you have an earpiece that you can plug it into the device.
I might actually.
But Bill, yeah, Bill, go ahead if you have anything to share. And
Yes, thank you. For Thursday, I've been talking to a couple that have been going through parental alienation, and they're having a lot of difficulties, and I've tried to help them get the information so they can show how the system has abused them and hasn't done anything to help them. And they have just gotten reports from the RCMP, which do not coincide with any of the reports they made to the RCMP about the situation. And they've been working to try and get the files from the IWK and the Halifax Regional Police Department as well, and also the Ottawa Police Department. So there's a lot of other agencies that have been involved with their case already. Their case has been going on for years, and I'm going to give them the opportunity to share exactly what they're going through, and maybe help other people who are stuck where they were, and help them to progress and get through their cases.
wow, wow. I mean, these are whilst we're waiting for Natalie to reconnect. We just keep going. But I mean, this is so real, Bill. Um, I hear so many stories out there, um, and how much this is breaking, children and parents. It's actually destroying people, and I just hope that at some point, uh, something is going to change in our communities, because we can't, you know, uh, keep going on like this. It's become a vicious cycle. You have people that have gone through this, and there are people that are going through it right now. And believe me, if nothing is done, more people are going to be affected. And it's not right. I don't think our communities will be stronger if we keep encouraging parental alienation. I strongly believe that it's time, and that's why you and I are doing this. To speak out.
Yes.
For this to stop.
The effects of alienation is, even if laws and regulations change today to recognize each case moving forward, the effects of alienation on everyone that's gone through it already will still affect generations to come. So it's going to take time to overcome this, and we need to start somewhere. There's always a starting place, and the first recognition of this pathology or syndrome, or whatever you would like to call it, the diagnosis of parental alienation, was by Richard Gardner in 1987. So he first recognized 8 behaviors associated with alienating behavior,
Right.
such as interfering with parenting time, withholding information about the children. He had 8 indicators, and he labeled it parental alienation syndrome. But because it was so broad, it was not accepted by the APA, American Psychological Association, or given its own recognition or diagnosis. Since then, other people have tried to label it with other names: attachment-based parental alienation, parental alienation. It's still the same. Many medical professionals now recognize parental alienation, and the effects of parental alienation as child psychological abuse, in the DSM-5, which is a clinical diagnosis of child psychological abuse with 3 diagnostic indicators. So this is the new path that the medical community is taking to recognize the effects of alienation on children. They're recognizing it as family violence, domestic violence by proxy. It's abuse, is what it is,
Yeah.
and it's can be diagnosed as child psychological abuse, according to the DSM-5
Mm. Wow.
testing standards.
Wow. That's very informative, Bill. Natalie, thanks for coming back on. Um, your can you try again?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but it's a little low.
That's will that help? Is that better?
Yeah, go up a little bit.
How's that?
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Okay enough?
I think yeah. I'm getting feedback from Facebook as well. So if it's low, I'm sure I'll be
Oh,
prompted as well. And we lost Bill. Um,
we're having a
so
great time here today.
yeah, I know, eh? I know what a night, but it is well. It is well.
Sorry about
It
that.
is
I
well.
guess I dropped off for a second.
Yeah,
Sorry, Bill.
yeah, it is well. It's just just tonight. we'll get we'll get through it. We'll get through it.
We will get
Uh,
there.
we'll get
Yes.
there. Yeah.
Yes.
So Natalie, I read your post on Facebook, and I forwarded it to myself because I keep reading it, right? And basically, you said that I'm starting to share my story. I now have my daughter, but in 2016, my best friend, ex-husband, and my parents, yes, my parents conspired together to swiftly alienate father. I believe the FNC is father and child, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. In 2017, I got custody back only because my ex was unstable and ended up in psych. In 2021, I revisited alienation, and it resulted in my son living with his dad in Ontario and my daughter living in BC with me. Wow. This post doesn't do the horror justice. I'm committed to bringing notice and light to a circumstance that plagues over 5,000 Canadians alone, both men and women.
Yeah.
This is powerful. And I'm so saddened that your kids have to be splitted.
Yeah. Me too.
It's just so sad. I mean, I'm just thinking about how these children can bond, right? And
Yeah.
one living in Ontario, one living in BC, just makes that impossible. But I'll let you go ahead, Natalie. No, just feel free and share your story.
Okay. Well, that's about the gist of it. What I will say for any parent that's experiencing alienation, the first thing to understand is you couldn't have seen this coming. There's no way that you can take the blame for this happening to your family, to yourself, to whomever is in the sphere. It is so insidious and malicious and tiny little movements. Even now, I was thinking about today before I came on about how I would explain how I got, from this best friend scenario and a co-parent
Mhm.
to what happened. And I still can't entirely explain it. I've done timelines, I've done all the things. Um, I trusted people and they let me down and they broke my trust and they broke my children's trust. And what went on in the court system was possibly even worse. So you've read my post. So what part of my story? I mean, I can go on all day. Listen, I've got, you know, decades worth of podcasts here.
Mhm.
What specifically could I answer for you, or what direction would you like me to go and explain?
Well,
I
go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. I'm familiar with the process of alienation and how it begins, and what you described is, again, almost textbook. You're betrayed by some of the closest people in your life,
Yeah.
and you didn't expect it, and you still don't understand what happened. And a lot of that is because you were in an abusive relationship. You were abused by the people you thought were going to help you, and they aligned everyone with their story narrative that was created, and everyone worked against you. And that makes you doubt yourself and who you were and who you tried to be and what you tried to do. And people feel guilt and shame over that. And it's not your fault, and you're correct. People really need to understand that when this happens to them, it's not their fault. They were abused by people that abused their trust. And that's the hardest thing to realize, because everyone just wants to blame themselves. And from the guilt and shame, they don't want to share the story with anyone else, which is what allows this to stay hidden for so long. How long has it been since this happened to you?
Well, that was 2016, so 6 years ago. Would have been planning, like I would have been a part of it, not knowing it for 7 years ago.
Hmm.
But if you don't mind, let's talk about the concept of abuse for a second, because one of the things I really struggled with is saying that I was abused. It's we limit the concept of abuse. It's just, I'm talking about society, in my perception of society. If it a mark on the outside, if my nose was broken, I've been abused. If my children suddenly start to like their dad better than me for reasons unknown, that's not abuse. That's just children's choices or circumstance or trauma. We throw these words around really casually, and at the same, people. I was diagnosed. So through all of this, I was diagnosed 4 years ago finally with severe PTSD because of what happened to me. And that finally gave a voice to my experiences. But people throw around the concept of like, oh, I've got PTSD from that bad movie I watched last week. I feel abused because my friend didn't show up for dinner. So we tend to not use abuse in the right way, if you get what I'm saying. And it gets very warped and watered down. And like what I've had to learn through my own journey is I finally had to come to terms with saying I was an abused woman. Now, that abuse did not start with alienation, and I am willing to harbor a bet over all the people I've talked to. Alienation was a piece of the abuse in a relationship. It was not the only type of abuse in the relationship. If that makes sense, Bill, Ben, what do you think about that?
Well, alienation is all about control. People that alienate their children or try to turn a child against a loving parent for their own malicious reasons is doing so out of their own selfish and pathological behaviors. They would suffer from a personality disorder such as narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder. And people in our society just say, oh, that's just how families are. No, this is abusive. The Divorce Act just changed to recognize coercive and controlling behaviors as family violence so that they could better deal with situations like this in the family courts, because right now the courts are contributing to these behaviors by creating an imbalance between the two parties, which is what is allowing one party to abuse that imbalance of power. And they align people with them to maintain that imbalance of power so they can have a bit of control or manipulate the other party's life. And that's all they drive for, is to be able to have that control. They don't love their children as most people do, because they don't have the proper attachments, because they suffer from unresolved trauma that has caused them to develop the narcissistic or borderline personality disorders. So without the proper family attachments and the system for the family, that they have a dysfunctional family unit where a lot of times the child will feel like they are in a higher spot than one parent, because one parent puts them in a position to say, oh, you're all grown up, you can make decisions for yourself. Children can't. When you enter into a divorce and you have a court order, this is an agreement, a contract between the two parents and the government on how they're going to co-parent their children. And one parent, if they suffer from a personality disorder, such as narcissistic or borderline personality disorder, they will try to manipulate it so they have the control in the relationship. So more custody and access, you get more child support, more spousal support, and you have more time with the children to be able to coerce or manipulate them into believing your narrative, which is where child psychological abuse comes in. The children start to share in the pathology and the false belief or the false story that is being told to them about their other parent, which causes them to reject their parent, which again, this is part of the process of alienation. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow process, and the longer it goes on, the more damaging it is and the harder it is to recover.
So if you don't mind, I think this is a good point to interject how my story started, because my story isn't typical. Maybe it is. We're not talking about it. Maybe how it happened to me is typical. I don't know. So my ex-husband left us out of the blue in 2013. I had, he had a girlfriend, a new house set up, a lot of money, powerful guy. And see, this is why we don't talk about this, because I'm talking about somebody who could hurt me. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he can try. He won't succeed now, but he could try. And he certainly did that for 6 or 7 years, almost 10 years, actually, total. I relied on somebody who I originally, she was, don't laugh, everybody, hold the applause, was our nanny. Very hand that rocks the cradle. We became very close. I was very ill early in both my children's births. And she became my sister, like part of my family. We had matching tattoos. We traveled together, all of us. We moved to Mexico City and back together, all of us. We did everything. I lived in BC. We both lived in BC. And in 2013, she moved to Ontario. Now, in her affidavits now, like during this case, she said it was to get away from me, which I'm not quite sure how you have to move an entire country when your parents are still there. A little suspect, but she convinced me that I needed her in order to survive, because I was exhausted. I was a single parent. I didn't know what I was doing. I was up against a very powerful guy who, yeah, I had money, not going to lie. I mean, my debit cards and sometimes wouldn't work, or they would. I spent more time in mediation and with lawyers than not. But I was dependent on that because I hadn't worked for a while. I'd had these 2 children and I'd been very ill. She convinced me I needed her. So much so, when I used to travel with my kids every 6 months from Vancouver to Toronto. She lived in Burlington, where I moved to. So, Ben, you're familiar, just down the road, and probably Mississauga, I'm guessing, if you're in PL. It was July the 1st, 2016. And she's like, you know what? There's this house. It's 2 blocks away. She's planning on getting pregnant with artificial insemination. Details don't matter, but they do for women. We went and saw the house. I made an offer a week later, and I bought the house. And I told my ex-husband, who wasn't my ex-husband yet, by the way, that this is what I'd done. And he was out of work at the time, and through circumstances I won't share here, his opportunities were better in Toronto. So away we went. However, I was an entrepreneur. I'm a Pilates instructor, amongst other things, but I had a studio, and I didn't want to shut it down until December. And a lot of clients, but I didn't want my kids to start school in the middle of the year, because I had done that across the country. Not fun. The perfect person was the guardian, my best friend. Stable, a nanny with reputed people in Burlington, someone who'd been in our lives for years. We got legal documents drawn up. And on, I think it was September 2nd, 2016, I sent my children on a plane with her to live in Ontario, in Burlington, while I closed up the house and everything here in Vancouver. From there, I'm not even sure what happened. I reread the court documents again today to refresh myself with the intricacies. My ex husband moved out there to live with her on October 7th, 2016. Now, the biggest question is, were they having an affair? That's the obvious, logical question. They weren't. They are two incredibly narcissistic, sociopathic people. Um, Along with my parents, this had actually been planned. Now that I look back, it had been planned months before. And it was just hanging the bait to see whether I would take it. And this person repeatedly convinced me I needed them. I could not be a mother without them. I was a horrible mother without them. That's how far it went in my mind. Now, that doesn't make any sense unless you've been through this as a father or a mother, a parent, a grandparent. I don't care which. In a matter of 4 weeks, my children wouldn't talk to me. I was flying back and forth across the country every 3 weeks. By They got a therapist involved without me even signing off on it, who wrote letters to me saying, I won't let you talk to your children. You're too damaging, without ever meeting me. I moved to Ontario, to Burlington, to my new house on December 19th, 2016, 2 blocks away from my children. I got photos on Christmas Eve, 2 blocks away from my not yet ex and my best friend of my children having a great party. I got photos on Christmas Day, and then I got served on, I believe, January 7th or 10th. Both of those are my children's birthdays, they're a year apart, for sole custody. And that's where I felt like my whole life shattered. So that's a period of me consciously understanding what was going on for possibly 3.5 months. That's how long it took. It didn't take long. And then it was 3 years after that in order to win in court just to say that I'm a good mom. There was nothing that followed through after that. I still co-parent. I still had to co-parent, and the rest of the alienation part of why my son and I are alienated again. And my ex tried again, and he won my son, and my daughter saw through it. That's kind of the bottom line. And that's very scary to say right now, because saying this publicly is, it's scary stuff. I'm not gonna lie. At the same time, I'm tired of being in fear, and I can't have a doorbell in my house because of when I got served when I was in Ontario. Like a doorbell. Sorry.
It's okay. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
all this personal information with us. I know how difficult it can be and how it can cause you to relive this over again. And I really want to know, we appreciate you taking the time to share this to try and help other people.
Yeah, of course. Well, not of course. I mean, it is scary, but it's hard today too. Today's Thanksgiving. It's a family day, right? I
Yeah.
think for any of us who are watching or listening to this podcast, we all understand that these family days are amongst the most difficult to navigate,
Mhm.
just by sheer, because I call this the beginning of my trigger season. This is in Canada. Thanksgiving through the New Year is full of hallmark moments, which aren't realistic, but as an alienated parent, they're very real. They feel very real.
So, Natalie, your daughter and your son, do they somehow have the opportunity to, connect by phone? Like, what's the relationship between, the two of them,
Not,
considering that they are living in two separate provinces?
yeah, they have access to each other. They vacation together. They don't talk to each other at all. My daughter refuses to, and my son is in a whole other narcissistic plane of his own. Unfortunately, that's been part of the journey, is to recognize that my child um, has some tendencies that are leaning into this. That he's not, though innocent they may be, they are being curated and molded. He's not reachable at the moment, and
I'm, I'm sorry to hear that, Natalie.
yeah, it sucks. Not gonna lie, it's.
And I want you to know that your story isn't that different than a lot of other people's. There is a case in British Columbia. I've researched the case. I found it on Google. Is the story of a boy called X. Now, the parents of the boy called X, the mother took part in the documentary Erasing Family, and the daughter is still with the mother. The father alienated the son against the mother, and when it was finally recognized, they had 5 experts come in to make a diagnosis of this case. Amy Baker, Kathleen Rea, Dr. Stephen Miller, and I can't remember the other 2, but those 3 names, they're very well respected medical professionals. And Dr. Stephen Miller developed the 5-factor model for identifying parental alienation, and Amy Baker has developed the 4-factor, which is a slight variation of the 5-factor model developed by Stephen Miller. And Amy Baker was just on the Red Table discussion last month with Jada Pinkett Smith. So that case in BC, the courts recognized that the son was being alienated against the mother. The father had family in England, and he sent the son over to England. And while he had a court order for the son to be returned to the mother for custody here in Canada, the British government, a judge there, overruled that decision and said the child is here, and we're not going to force him to return to the mother. And as far as I know, still to this day, he has not returned to see his mother or his sister. So I understand your case. It's not that different than everyone else, and I'm glad you're here sharing it, so nobody else feels alone, like they're the only ones going through this. So thank you.
Thank you. It's I think that's the most important part, is that until I started to share my story, like really sharing it in the past couple of weeks, I had isolated myself into my own model. I share an alienation, but I'm different. I'm not. And there's a lot of power and understanding that together we talk about the scary stuff. The scary stuff exists. That's the thing. Not talking about it doesn't make it not exist. It's still here. We're still going to court. We're still dealing with lawyers. We're still being almost bankrupted, if not bankrupted. We're still dealing with the heartache of, in some cases, like Bill, you're talking about being in court for 7 years. We talk about our children's lifetimes as our children. It's 18 years at best. Yeah. So we're losing, me not as much, gratefully in some ways, we're losing half of our children's lifetimes as our children, not as adults, over what? Like, what is the point? And that's my biggest argument, and where I'm coming from now is why. What I went through in court, my court case cost $750,000. Yeah. Now, I'm lucky I had it. I recognize that. A lot of people are like, well, you had money, so you got out. No, that's not why. I'm lucky I had the money to go against $1,000.
I think we lost your mic.
Yeah, we lost your audio, Natalie.
No.
Hmm. Right. Natalie is correct in saying, she spent $750,000, which is, and it's a large amount of money. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And now, when you look at the case of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, they went through 5 years, each of them well over $1 million in legal fees, and Angelina Jolie managed to get the judge thrown out, so they're going to have to start the whole proceedings all over again.
Right.
all that
Right.
money for that 5 years of litigation is gone, and they're starting over again.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Sorry, I'll do better next time. I promise.
No, that's good. No, you're doing good. But I'm very proud of you, Natalie.
Thank you.
It's not everybody that has the strength to go through this. Um, it's a very emotional process. Um, and I appreciate the fact that you've taken this negative experience and turned it into a positive story that you are sharing. It's not just a story that you are sharing, but it's also providing a relief for you, and also assuring other parents that there's hope in the
There's hope.
future.
There is hope.
That the alienators will always continue to do what they're doing, but it takes what we are doing to expose it, right? And
Yeah.
until we all come out and start talking about this, believe me, I did not know anything about parental alienation until I had to go through the process.
Yeah, me too.
I never heard anybody talking about it. I never even heard it anywhere. It took, I think, 3 or 4 years after I was
Hmm.
going through it to start doing a lot of research, and I started coming across, uh, you know, uh, documents, internet searches, research materials, and I started to think that, oh, okay, so I fall into this category,
Yeah.
right? Which is very unfortunate. I've always, you know, argued that a child does not belong to one parent, right? It takes both parents to raise a responsible child.
Hmm.
Um, and we live in a society where this is becoming a vicious cycle. We have a whole generation of children that went through this crisis, and we live in a new generation where a marriage truly or relationship doesn't really mean nothing because they can't
Yep.
hold it. There's nothing that holds them together. There's no value for the institution of family anymore, which is very unfortunate. And
Hmm.
I think that's why all of us, including our VS, we all have a responsibility to rise up and start talking about these things. Bill's show on Thursday is going to be focused on just sharing stories, and we need to get these stories out because, believe me, sometimes we may think that people know, but
Oh yeah.
people have no clue that this is happening in our
Not a clue.
communities, right? And
Yep.
I see your Facebook group that you've started. Very very encouraging, and I think
Thank you.
you are on the right path because it's all part of the healing process, right? I mean, Bill, myself, I mean, there are lots of us out there that are dealing with this issue. We didn't welcome. I mean, we not. I don't think anybody asked for this,
I would hope
right?
not.
I
No.
don't think.
No.
Believe me,
I don't think anybody would. No.
I don't think anybody asked for this. I don't think it
No.
just happens, right? And the same way it's happened to us, it may happen to somebody else. And until we start talking and start raising awareness, it will keep happening to people.
It doesn't just happen to people. People are targeted by
Mm.
the people that suffer from narcissistic or borderline personality
Oh.
disorder, and they're very manipulative, and that is how they start in the relationship with the love bombing. And there's 4 stages of the relationship when you're involved with someone with a narcissistic or borderline personality disorder. There's the rejection, the love bombing, the cool down period. I can't remember the 4 phases right off, but it's a cycle. And this doesn't happen overnight. In the first stages of a relationship with one of these people, they're very loving, very caring, and very attentive. And that's the love bombing stage where they try to gain your control and your
Mhm.
trust, or
Mhm.
not they try to gain your
Hmm.
trust. And
Mhm.
from there, there's a degradation process where they again, it happens slowly over a period of time, and to the point where there's almost no affection in the relationship.
Mhm.
It's almost total rejection, degradation. And by that time, you are a broken person who has been isolated from your family and friends, and you are alone. And this didn't happen overnight or in a week or in a month. This happened over years of being in a relationship with a manipulative person who has managed to isolate you from all your supports and family, and basically have complete control over you and all the aspects of your life. So it's a slow process,
Mhm.
and that's how people like us end up getting there. We have
Mhm.
empathy, we are caring people, and we try to help people,
Mhm.
and they take advantage of that, and they take advantage of us, and they recognize people with empathy because they're the ones that are easiest to manipulate and take control of.
Mhm.
Well, if
Mhm.
I can say one thing about, I coach in every aspect of physical, mental, emotional um, things. As a Pilates instructor, I talk about the body because it's easy as people are like metaphysical as, whatever, woo woo. Talk about the body though, how your body works. How everything works in the universe is the path of least resistance. So if you're resisting the manipulator, if you're catching on, if you're thinking like, oh, hey, I'm asking a question, what's the path of least resistance that they have? Your children. They are the path of least resistance. They're not going to know, no matter how much I may be questioning or my friends may question something. And that's how it works. A narcissist, a manipulator, a psychopath, a sociopath will
Mhm.
find that niche, that little arrow of the path of least resistance, and they won't stop till they find it. And that's the challenging part. Is you can't say that any one of us it should have stopped at some point. No, they just found that little narrow avenue to get to us until they got bored and went to somebody else. But then they found it, so
They're
there you go.
constantly seeking a source of to
Exactly.
feed them,
Yeah.
and part of what makes them feel better is demeaning other people and making them to make themselves feel
Mhm.
better. And that's
Mm-hmm.
because they had suffered some childhood trauma that is unresolved, and that unresolved trauma is what leads to the pathologies or disorders of narcissistic or borderline personality disorder.
Although I will argue on that other side, I suffered physical and emotional abuse growing up too, and I did not end up in that direction. So I argue that a tiny bit, just not. I don't like that the application of almost an excuse because I've heard it in court. That's why. Oh well, they had a tough childhood. Well, so did I. And
Hitler,
like, and so, and that's why I challenge, not to challenge you, challenge that archetype to say, well, that's the reason.
well, again, this isn't 100%. There's when you're talking about people that suffer from narcissistic or borderline personality disorder, it's about 5 to 6% of the general population suffer from each personality disorder,
Hmm.
and there's a small percentage that are psychopaths, and sociopaths are also created from their environment. Now, saying that, not everybody that is subjected to the same environment will develop these pathologies.
Of
Now,
course.
we've got this new series out on Jeffrey Dahmer,
Oh, I
Monster
haven't.
on Netflix. Now,
Mm-hmm.
Jeffrey Dahmer was not a psychopath, is what most people believe. His main diagnosis was borderline personality disorder. He also had schizophrenia, but his
Mm-hmm.
main diagnosis and pathology was borderline personality disorder. And that just goes to show how dangerous people with this personality disorder are. Now, again, he would be at one extreme of the spectrum.
Of
Not
course.
all borderline personalities are going to be like that. But if you look at a couple of the very, very high profile cases that are in the news and have been in the news over the past year or two, look at the divorce of Angelina Jolie and Brad
Yeah, of
Pitt,
course.
and also the defamation case of Amber Heard
Amber
and
and
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp. Of course.
So both Amber Heard and Angelina Jolie have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So not everyone that grows up in an abusive environment will develop these personality disorders, but all cases of alienation will have one of the parties that suffer from either narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder.
So, Bill, there's a relationship here between mental health
Mm-hmm.
and parental alienation. I mean,
Yep.
I look at
Yes.
what Natalie wrote. There's an element of mental health issues there.
There's a large, I'm
Um,
going to tell you, there's a large element.
I'm just being nice.
I know, I know we're being,
I'm just
again,
trying to water it down. Yeah.
yes, I'm just making sure that we're, yes,
Um,
yes,
no, but
definitely,
I
yes.
mean, this is serious, right?
It is.
And with Angelina Jolie and Amber, you know, same same thing. So how come that? I mean, there's research out there. People have been diagnosed with this, and it's still being condoned. Bill, anything?
Um, this is where the legal system comes in,
Mhm.
and it's not just the legal system; it's the American Psychological Association and the DSM-5 who have failed to add parental alienation. And the World Health Organization, while they were going to add the term parental alienation to the ICD-11, the International Classification of Diseases Revision 11, which went into effect January 1st of this year, I believe, they had it in there pre-release that went around to professionals. And a number of groups lobbied the World Health Organization to remove the term
Against her.
parental alienation. Now, while the shared persecutory delusion of the parent child caregiver relationship is still there, that they labeled parental alienation, the label of parental alienation is gone, and it's the parent child caregiver relationship
Hmm.
indicator for abuse or shared persecutory delusion. Um, so that's what they added. They added the diagnosis in there, but they didn't call it parental alienation, and that's what they originally intended to label it. But because they were lobbied by so many groups, they removed it and just kept the diagnosis. So they called it parent-child caregiver relationship. And what it is when a parent suffers from a fixed and false belief, and they project that onto the child. Children are very easily manipulated, especially
Hmm.
by someone in
Mhm.
a position of power and control
Trust.
over them.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So after a time of being subjected to this constant bombardment, they will start to share in the persecutory delusion created by the parent. At this time, they are now delusional. And this is one of the diagnostic indicators that will give you a clinical diagnosis of child psychological abuse. The problem is, most people doing these assessments don't recognize the indicators. And what they do is they hear a child say, I don't want to go with mommy, I'm afraid of her. Or I don't want to go with daddy because he scares me. They're not articulating what the problem is or why they don't want to see that parent. They're just afraid. They don't even know what they're afraid of.
Yeah. Very
That's
true.
that's that's been planted there. They've
Hmm.
been taught to fear. They don't know what they're afraid of. They've just been taught to fear their mother or their father. And that, again, most professionals that aren't experienced in dealing with alienation don't see what is really happening. All they hear is a child saying they're afraid, and there's got to be a reason for it. And
Hmm.
all reason goes out the window, and they just want to. That this is where cognitive dissonance comes in. It's easier to believe this story that the child is being abused by one parent than to really look and see if this parent is really manipulating them and abusing them themselves. And they don't want to
Yeah.
acknowledge that they could possibly be helping that. All they hear is that the child's in danger and they just want to not make a mistake and protect that child.
Mhm.
So it's
Or
easier to
not be,
believe.
sorry.
Yeah, it's easier to believe the story they're told, and they act out of fear and just want to try to protect that child and do what they think is best to save that child because the child is saying they're afraid.
Mhm. But the children eventually. Sorry, Natalie, you were gonna say something before I.
I was just going to say again, path of least resistance. It's easier, and I again air quote so many things. Easier to say that child is in danger, so we take the child or child side, than to put the work in, and that comes into the legal system. That comes into cost. That's kind of the bottom line, unfortunately, with
Mhm.
that. Anyhow, yeah. Sorry to interject. To just
No.
No, that's
Okay.
that's great, and that's correct. Most people that do assessments or come into these situations don't have the qualifications or education to
Mhm.
recognize or be able to perform the proper tests to diagnose whether or not this is the authentic voice of the child or this is the coerced or manipulated voice of the child.
yeah,
And
exactly.
until they know which it is, they're just stumbling around blindly, making decisions and interfering, and possibly leaving the children in an abusive situation because they
Yep,
don't recognize what's going on.
Mhm.
exactly.
But Bill, these children are so innocent. Sometimes they don't know that they are being manipulated or they are being used
Hmm.
against the other parent. Sometimes, fear. There's a fear factor that is also involved. There's this syndrome that is called Stockholm syndrome.
I was going to mention that Stockholm syndrome. Yes.
Yeah, and basically, children develop positive feelings toward the same people that tell them they love them, and these are the abusers. They develop these positive feelings for them over time. They believe them. They are being coached to believe the lies. They are being coached to believe the manipulations. But it's just their level of knowledge, right? It's like somebody constantly lying to you about something that is not true. Over time, you buy into that lie, thinking that is the truth,
True.
right? So these children develop this positive attachment towards the abusers, and somehow they find some level of safety or comfort in that zone, and it takes time for them to come to that realization that they are being used for some ulterior motives. Go ahead, Bill.
Children, a lot of those things you were just speaking of were covered in the documentary Race and Family, where children love and children don't fear. They have no fear. They have to learn fear. If you
Mm-hmm.
tell them not to touch a stove because it's hot, they'll usually go touch it because you just told them not to. And they don't understand until they, oh, that hurt. So that's how they learn. They make mistakes. They're not afraid. They learn fear to protect themselves. And you when they learn that a stove is hot, they don't need to be told not to touch it. And children, again, naturally just love. So even if their parent or parents are abusive to them, they love them because it's their
Mhm.
parents and they need them to
Yeah.
survive.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if they have two parents where one they know love is unconditional and the other parent
Mm-hmm.
will only provide them affection or attention whenever they behaved properly or acted the right way or did the right things, and they're more likely to turn against the parent who expresses unconditional love because they're not afraid of losing the affection of that parent. The affection, the parent that uses their affection as a means to control and manipulate the child, they'll be afraid of losing that attachment and that connection with the parent, and that parent's causing that fear,
Mm-hmm.
and they're breaking the normal attachment bonds in the children that would develop in a healthy family dynamic. And because of that, they are more likely, if they're already being conditioned to respond to doing what the parent wants to get the affection. So they learn that this is a learned behavior. And because of that, that is why you'll have children saying, I'm afraid of daddy, I'm afraid of mommy, because they're afraid of losing the affection of the parent who is using it as a cookie
Yeah.
or a
Mm-hmm.
carrot.
Mhm.
And they will turn on the unconditional loving parent because they're not afraid of losing that parent's care and love. And that's what's so heartbreaking. That splits the child and it breaks their development process, and they don't develop normal attachments or are ever able to have healthy relationships because they don't trust. And again, this is part of how the cycle continues. They feel like there is no such thing as unconditional love. There's always a price to pay. There's a catch with it. There's a string. There's something attached. People just don't love you. This is my mom, and the only time she loves me is when I do this. Or this is my dad, and the only time he loves me is if I clean my room and I do all the dishes and I whatever I'm told to do. They're being conditioned that love comes with conditions, and that's not healthy. And children don't develop normal relationships and attachments that grow up in that environment.
Yeah, luckily you had something to say. I saw your hand up. So.
Yeah, I know, it's like school. Hi. So one of the things in my story that has caused me a lot of shame and I get questions about is how I'm alienated from my son a second time. And what Bill is saying, I agree with, it flips when they're teenagers. So my son is now 16. He was 15. Yes, 14 when he walked out of my house to go live with his dad in Ontario. And it was because I had conditions. At that point, my conditions were rules, i.e., you show up at home at a certain time, you do your homework, you're part of your sports teams. I mean, I was a massive part of his basketball coach, does all sorts of things. But suddenly, my constraint of rules, and I'm not talking like rules, I'm talking like normal, put your dishes in the dishwasher rules. Yes. It was an excuse and a breaking point to flip the cycle. So what you're talking about, Bill, is like what I experienced the first time around. And then suddenly that dynamic was flipped with my son. And it's what my daughter talks about, that her brother went against the fact that I had simple rules of the household. We did certain things a certain way. And I'm not saying like it wasn't mommy dearest. It's really like put your shoes away, do your laundry, put your dishes away, whatever. Go to bed at midnight, please. Thank you. Turn your phone off, whatever. Yeah. So I just want to clarify that because I literally through talking about this, I just realized I've had both sides. I've had the primary side and now I've had the teenager side. And it is the same thing, but flipped.
Rules and conditions are a little bit of a separate issue. While I can understand why you had difficulties with your son, and again, that there would be a parent or someone in a position telling them that they don't have to listen to you because they're grown up. Yes. And that's called adultification. And that's another form of manipulation and abuse.
And that is what happened. Yes.
And that is what happens. That's how they manage to split the relationship between the child and parent. The abusers, they try to create an imbalance in the family dynamic. It's called an inverted hierarchy, where the child believes they can make their decisions about their life when they're not capable or qualified to. That's why you're a parent, and us as parents, we have rules for them to follow, and that's not putting conditions on our love. That's just teaching them how to grow up and be responsible for themselves and how they're expected to act in society as an individual when they grow up. Yeah. Now, abusers and manipulators want to create dependence on children. They want the children to always go to them and ask them for help and to resolve their problems. So the parent or the abuser always uses triangulation and tries to create conflict so that the child always returns to them to resolve that conflict for them. So they become dependent on them to resolve all their issues. And that doesn't create an individual that is healthy to go out into society and be on their own. Children need to learn independence and be able to think critically for themselves and make their own decisions based on the information they have in front of them instead of just blindly doing as they're told.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, you're talking about hierarchies. Talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? This
Yes.
is the abuse is the inverted part of that. And for anyone that doesn't understand that, go look it up. It's triangle. It's super simple. Don't be intimidated by the words. It's actually stuff you already know.
Yeah. It's almost 3 past 9.
Okay.
We'll be winding down, but Natalie, I'm gonna give you the platform to have a final word. Something that you wanna, something impactful that you wanna share with our audience, because I believe that, I mean, reading some of the comments, people have been blessed. People are happy
Oh
that we are
good.
talking about these things,
Oh
right?
good.
So any final words that you want to share, you can pour out your heart. That's fine, but something that somebody can take away tonight.
Oh, I would say that what has happened is not a reflection of who you are, and it's not a reflection of who you will become. It is a circumstance. It is something that has occurred that you did not participate in, and you can dig deep. You have the strength to look forward, do the work, find the research, reach out to people, and know that this is not your definition. Your definition is not as an alienated parent. This is not it. That's not who you are. That's not who you're going to be forever. Right now, it is a subtext of who you are as mom or dad, grandma, grandpa, whatever figure, primary figure you are in this child or children's life. Don't let parental alienation be your title at the bottom of the screen. Like you see the scrolling down, that's not you. It is a circumstance. You're going to come through it. And by being here and hearing us and hopefully telling your own story and reaching out, you're going to find more strength than you realize. There's no shame. There's only support when we all come together. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bill. Any
Yeah, no,
final any
I think
final
that's
words?
great. I think she summed it up perfectly. It's we all need to come together as a community and support one another because it's hard to go through this alone. And everyone out there, that you're not alone going through this. There are other people going through the same, and there is a community here where you can get help and support.
Yeah, you're both right, and something that Natalie, you said is that don't let your circumstances define who you are.
Who you are.
um, don't let the label of parental alienation, don't let them, don't, because that's what they want to do, right? They want to label you
Yeah,
as this
100%.
is who you are. You are an angry person. You are this, you are that, but don't allow that to define you, because once you accept that label, you'll struggle with it for a while.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
I have learned, and I think Bill is doing the same thing, you are doing the same thing, is that we're using those bad experiences to help other people. And I think that's the best that we can do for other people that are going through the same situation. I mean, sometimes we have to go through some things just to be able to save somebody's life.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we are doing tonight, being able to, save a life, because somebody is sitting there somewhere, thinking about what to do next. But,
Yeah.
that person is watching us tonight knowing that he or she is not alone. There are so many of us that are going through this. But, don't let the circumstances that you find yourself now define you. You're a good person, you have a bright future ahead of you. There's so much that you can do for yourself. And the children, believe me, are not seeing you on a regular basis, but they always go to bed thinking about you. They
Yes,
always
they
go to
do.
bed thinking about mom, they go to bed thinking about dad. And someday they'll come to you. No matter wherever they are taken to, they will come looking for you. We've seen this playing out so many times where children go out to go look for their parents. A raising family. We saw this with Ashley, Bill,
Yeah.
where she had to go look for her dad. And now look at her dad when when they came on the
Red table.
red table. I mean, I was just looking at the dynamics between Ashley and the dad and the mom as well. And it was such an awful moment, but it was a joy for for Ashley. She was a victim, right? And they are doing very well. They are doing very well. So
Awesome.
if there's something that you can take out of this, don't let this situation, don't let this crisis break you down. Believe me, there's so much ahead of you. There's so much life. There's so much you can do for yourself. There's the children are looking up to you. They want to see you strong. They want to see you doing well, and they want to have a story to share with you someday. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Natalie. Bill,
Thank you.
thank you so much, and hopefully, we'll be able to have you back again, Natalie.
Oh, absolutely.
It's been a blessing. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'm gonna play our outro, but Bill and Natalie, if you can just stay back for a few minutes,
Of course.
I'll
Certainly.
be with you in a few minutes.
Thank you, everybody.